Well, today I thought that Rich and I would share a little bit of a download and a recap. I know many of you that are attending today were part of our workshop 2 weeks ago. Enough of that. We'll move on to our business here. We did want to highlight some of the activities from the workshop, but I guess to kind of get us cranking, for those of you that had the opportunity to attend, do you want to share any of your takeaways or summations or thoughts that you got from the workshop? Maybe any high point, maybe one or two things you heard or learned that you didn't know before you got there?
Yeah, I can go. Hearing a lot about the blue collar success organization that you guys work with and their pricing details was a really interesting thing, and I know it made a big difference for Kyle's Plumbing. So that was a real big learning for me, as well as then just the depth of detail that we were able to go through during the workshop that can be a little bit tough when you're on your own, and getting some of those extra details and context was super valuable for me. So those are kind of my two big ones.
So Quinn, if you don't mind, if I can kind of put you on the spot, did the workshop help you refine or dial in your thinking of the targets you want to go after?
I would say a little bit. I've been refining that for quite some time, so it's fairly refined at the moment in terms of where I'm aiming, but more so how to think about some of those deals and considerations that didn't occur to me before is where I was getting a lot of value out of the conversations. And I'd say geographically, that is the one area that it was a bit more refined coming out of the workshop.
Great. Okay. Anybody else from the workshop attendee list?
I'll just add that I really enjoyed connecting with other AEs and getting to know other people who are further along down a path, maybe just starting out, just to share some best practices, talk about learnings along the way. I think it made everything seem more real, seeing how it manifested in other folks' different experiences. So that was really helpful to me.
Well, you did enjoy connecting with us?
A little bit with you guys, a little bit with the Acquira team, but mostly with the AEs, I'd say.
Just kidding, I'm just
Hey, Doug. Yeah, just for me, just to piggyback on what Katie said, this is a bit of a lonely journey, so to be with like-minded people was really helpful. And when I try to talk to family and friends, I sound like an alien to them for what I'm doing. So it was great to be among kindred spirits. I do think like just being in an environment, it helped to demystify the journey quite a bit for me. This is, I don't know how many times you do this in your lifetime, but this is my first. And so, as I said before, that mental file drawer is quite empty of how to do this. So this was helpful to kind of help put some files on the shelf there. I like the pitch portion there, the mini Shark Tank. I think that's some great questions, great feedback in that session, and it was really helpful to get the different perspectives, a lot of different brains in the tent. And I think it helped validate my thinking for the journey I'm taking for my business, and it gave me some good watch outs as well. So I think it was all around just a really valuable experience.
So to that end, Mark, how much closer are you on your deal now since we met at the workshop?
Yeah, listen, I spent an entire day there Wednesday. I got through 90% of the post-LOI checklist. I see all the warts in the business, but I see some great shining spots on it. I'm going to use my Acquira network and Alan to be some devil's advocate, some pushback on my thinking because I have some blind spots. But I think we're close to getting towards purchase agreement. Nice. Very good. Anybody else that might have been with us at the workshop? Let me see, going through the list. Maybe that's it for attendees. Rich, I know it's self-serving, but you want to give your take on the outcome of the workshop?
Well, it doesn't have to be self-serving. But
Well, I'm corporately, not
I know.
personally, but corporately, it's
No.
awkward for an Acquira guy to tell you how he thinks the workshop went.
No, I actually, you know what? I thought it was probably the best workshop we've ever done. I've been to every single one of them, which is like I've always joked with people, it's kind of annoying, but at the same time, it's great to get to actually meet people that we talk to through video chats or Slack or whatever. But I thought it was the most. I think it was the best one we've ever done from the standpoint of I think it was very content rich around specific areas. It was really the first workshop where we didn't have to lean as heavily on Hayden to just kind of not so much whiff, but everything for all the information to flow through Hayden, which is fine usually because he has a good grasp of every aspect of the business. But at the same time, it allowed him to kind of relax and a little bit and participate in the discussions and give Doug, myself, and Alok an opportunity to talk about our specific areas and really spout off our specific expertise in our areas. So I thought that was pretty good because we were able to go a little bit more in depth as opposed to staying on a surface level with all the information. And I think it was the AEs that were there were very interactive with us, which is usually the case. But I think because of the depth of the content that we provided, it allowed them to ask even deeper level questions. And I thought that was helpful. And then I think we've had the best dinner that we've ever had at a workshop since we didn't have to pay for it and and we could order whatever we wanted. So my two steaks were great. So, but other than that, I thought it was a very useful workshop. Again, just meeting with individuals one-on-one. That I thought that was very, very cool to kind of get an insight into an AE's thinking as to what they wanted to do as far as building a portfolio versus just buying a single business. And I talked to a number of AEs kind of around their goals around that. So I thought it was really, really good, and I thought it was the best one. And hopefully going forward, we maintain that type of structure.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's pretty safe to say, and even Hayden himself said it, he thinks this could have been potentially the best one we've ever done as a company, and for several reasons, part of which is locale, part of which is strategy on our part on how we wanted to deliver it, and then the interaction that we did have with everybody. And always when I come back from the workshops, I'm think about one key element at the heart of any of these business ventures is the people that are involved. And the team you inherit as a new owner, or the team you're going to build by reaching out and hiring others, or support network. Mark has reminded us, you're already the CEO of your business. How do you want to run it? What support partners do you want to bring into the network? Who do you want to lean on? Who do you want to rely upon to fill any gaps you may have individually? And the collaborative opportunity in the workshop setting was a great way to fill some of those gaps, ask some questions maybe you hadn't thought about, and hear other people's ideas and get that impact and influence from it. I always learn something about something when I go to these things, and it's always a pleasure to kind of stay on that continuous learning journey. So I think that's a big part of it. So with all that said, what I want to do for those of you that might be relatively new to Acquira and just starting the training journey through the material online, part of the backbone of the workshop was we did in some fashion essentially follow the arc of the story of the buyer journey, the acquisition journey. We did spend a good bit of time talking about the investment thesis, getting your sort of foundational thinking underneath you and how critical that is to work on that and dial that in. so that if nothing else, you don't waste a lot of time lifting rocks and kissing frogs that aren't going to get you anywhere closer to your goal. And so there's a certain economy about having a well thought investment thesis before you step out on the journey. But then once you do that and you start identifying target companies that could be possible wins, then there's the process, the method of gathering data, talking to brokers, building data rooms, building your rapport with potential sellers, and moving through the process. And there's a mountain of material in our content, but there are also some real critical checklists and tools that you need to think about, and don't just gloss over them in the training, but know that they're going to be an integral part of your process. For instance, was it Mark? I think you alluded to the post LOI checklist for your due diligence. That's a very robust. I think, as I recall last count, there's about 200 check boxes on that list of things to think about in all of the different areas of the business. And as you're engaging and going through the process, looking at the business in a deeper dive, you want to be able to have a plan. You don't want to just forget something or overlook something and quickly move through it, because one of those forgotten or skipped over elements might be the very pivot that makes the business either unbankable or unattainable, or simply just something you maybe don't really want to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Rich, let me stop there. You got other thoughts along that line? Early stages of the arc here?
Yeah, I think Doug kind of nailed it there. I mean, there's that checklist is there to help guide you through the process, whether we're working with you or not. But at the same time, I think sometimes I have to help AEs understand and put the brakes on a deal, not so much to kill the deal, but to slow down the process sometimes, because everyone wants to move so fast. Everyone's excited about buying a business. But then, you start kind of, well, that doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. We can skip that. We can skip that just to get to the close, just so that they could say they bought a business, and then, buying the business. And then, that one step that you skipped over, for instance, in a construction business, not really understanding your WIP, you're at the close, not understanding that in its totality and what, how it can affect your cash flow. It ends up coming to bite you in the, as they say in England, the bum. You gotta be, I mean, there's things on that checklist that may or may not be applicable for your particular purchase, but at the same time, make sure you understand why it's not applicable. And maybe, if you're buying a service business, obviously, if there's something construction related, probably not applicable, but at the same time, understand why, because that'll inform you and give you more insight into the business and to give you an understanding of how much you actually know about your business from that standpoint. So don't take that list lightly. It's there for a reason, and there's adaptability to the list, because I know some of you, if I'm working with you, there are going to be some things that aren't on that list that I might see or point out that, hey, we might want to take check this out or take a look at this. And that's only because the list is supposed to be general in nature to kind of guide you kind of as a framework. But then there's more specifics depending on the industry, the business characteristics itself, maybe even the seller, where you may have to kind of, depart, not so much depart from the list, but add to the list some, basically there's some nuance around, a particular area that you need to be aware of. So, but definitely use that list as kind of a guide, but that is an important part of the process. And I think if you guys are comfortable with it, comfortable with the questions around it, you can get through the end of that process and feel good about knowing that, hey, I've looked at every aspect of the business. I'm comfortable with my decision. Let's move forward on it. Yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah. Well, so what I maybe should have done at the start, let me share with you a graphic here that we used as kind of the centerpiece of the workshop. It's a very basic flow diagram of the process from start to finish. Our content in the Think If It training does hit on each of these areas, and it introduces some of our tools and spreadsheets and calculators that you're going to want to use. So obviously, ultimately, everything starts with deal search. What's not on the map here, again, I'll kind of beat on it a little more, is the investment thesis. You want to have that as the starting point of your search process. But then you get into search, you identify a target company, you go to LOI. But to get to LOI, one of the first things that we talk about in the training, we have the intrinsic value calculator that allows you to take some of the data you might have gotten from the broker or the seller via the SIM or any other data they are willing to share. You can plug in some raw numbers, maybe starting with an asking price, but then you start answering questions in the IBC, and you determine that there are pluses and minuses to be applied to get you to the right multiplier to propose as your purchase price for the deal. So that is a big help, and it's the whole basis and thought behind the IVC is that there are elements that impact the business, and this is when you get into questions like customer concentration, length of history of the business, tenure of employees, skill level of employees, sophistication of systems, age of equipment. A lot of those variables, and I could go on and on with the list and the elements, but they're accounted for in that IVC. So you kind of check off pluses and minuses for those. They either add to a multiple or take away from a multiple to get you to the number you want to roll into your LOI. And once you get there and you do get that countersigned LOI, you're immediately going to move into the due diligence phase. And this is really split in parallel tracks. You commission a QOE review. And one of the topics that came out of the workshop is it might not be a bad idea to ask your QOE provider to stair step the effort. There's a carve out they can do that is more of a simple proof of cash. And that's taking some of the revenue numbers that are reported versus the bank statements and see if the story rings true. Do the bank statements properly reflect what is being claimed as the revenue numbers? And that may or may not give you a green light to move forward on the deal at all. And the point being, I think what we ended up talking about at the workshop is you don't have to invest in a full-blown QOE, which can cost you upwards of 15 grand if you're dealing with the right kind of agency to help you with that. You can have a red light, green light much sooner and determine whether or not you want to keep moving forward. But if QOE is progressing well, you can still simultaneously start your due diligence, and that's that massive 200-item checklist we talked about that is very important. And this is where you're fundamentally going to be talking with the seller. And we have had deals where the sellers are willing early in the process to introduce other members of their team into the due diligence. They'll allow you to talk to the office manager. They'll allow you to talk to maybe a person that is like a GM. Other sellers are more reluctant at this point because they don't know if you're going to be the final buyer or not. So they're a little reticent to open kimono and take it too far. But hopefully they at least will work with you directly to answer a lot of these questions. And then there is a notion of coming up through the process of due diligence and making a formal FID. FID is short for final investment decision. Do you have the data you want that's checked all the boxes and answered all the right questions in a favorable way that you truly want to move forward on the deal? If it's a red light, no, you don't want to do that deal, guess what? You go back to deal search and you basically start that pipe all over again. If it's yes, you are willing to move forward, this is where you can more aggressively get into working with your banker on the banking package and simultaneously get with your attorney on looking at structure and all the legal support you may have. You get through some of that, we do advocate in our material that there should be a pre-closing site visit if you have not had a chance to, and this is more about meeting people rather than it is looking at the business, because ideally you've already seen the business through part of the due diligence process. Several people have talked about sellers being willing to, entertain them on campus, take a walk through the shop and stuff. Mark, you've done what, 2 or 3 visits already on yours?
Yeah, I've done 2. Yeah.
Katie, I think you've done 1 or 2 on yours, haven't you?
Just the one.
Just the one. But as you get to pre-closing, this is more of a key man interview. You want to kind of validate all your discussion with the seller with other members of the team, if at all possible. And I'm not going to deny we have had a deal break out at this point after all the hard work that everybody's done, because the seller was just still paranoid about introducing an outsider to the team. And quite simply put, that ought to be a red flag. That's hiding something. And whether it's all emotional or psychological on the seller's part, it probably has an impact on the viability of the business. So get through that successfully, you're ready to move into closing, and then ultimately your succession transition. And this is where we talk about our ACE program offering to help you with that whole transition planning and process event. So, Rich, let me kind of kick it back to you. Let's go back to this FID box. I'm not sure, to be honest, that we do enough about encouraging people to formally make an FID, because when you're running through QOE and running through due diligence, it all sort of feels like it mashes together. Mm-hmm. And you kind of come out at the end and you've got most of your check boxes applied, but there's always kind of a quick jump. Let's get going on banking, and talk a little bit about the idea of more intentionally and more formally declaring it a go or no go investment decision.
Yeah, I mean, so as you come out of LOI and you're trying to decide kind of what the next steps are, and I'm going to approach this as if you were working on your own, not necessarily working with us, but you get your QOE back, and you have your post LOI checklist that you're working through. One thing you have to do with both of those documents is, yes, there's a cash proof that makes sure that the cash is tying out or what have you, to make sure that the numbers are there, are representative on the revenue and expense side that are there theoretically. I mean, it's a quick check. It's basically a reality check. Yeah, that's important. But I talk about this quite a bit whenever we start discussing the QOE, and then we'll jump into the post LOI checklist real quick. But make sure you go through that QOE thoroughly, not just looking for the bottom line number that comes out. Yes, that's important because you want to compare what you're paying to the business, you want to see what that actual multiple is that you're paying for the business versus what you thought it was based on the seller's representation through the CIM and through the LOI and what have you. So you want to do that comparison check, but you also want to go through and read through the content of that report, whether it's customer churn, whether it's the employee list, making sure that matches up, whether it's, looking at your top, 4 or 5 receivables, and make sure you understand the nature of the relationship with those particular customers, your vendor list. You really want to go your equipment lists. You want to go through and understand all of that and read through the entire report, because that's gonna, as you come down to the decision point, you want to make sure that all that stuff's in your head and that it makes sense. Okay. Now you're going to marry that information with what you're finding in the narrative and the LOE, the post. I always can never say this, but the post LOI due diligence checklist. You want to take all that information, because a lot of that's going to be narrative. It's questions that you're answering with the seller, compare it to the QOE to make sure it makes sense. And then there's going to be some documents in there that are just, that you're gathering, your LLC document or the company's corporate documents or LLC documents or whatever, corporate charter. You're reading through all that information to make sure, that there's nothing funny there, along with the rest of that due diligence information. And you want to put all that information together. And at that point, getting to the decision point, that's when you're formally making a decision. Hey, I'm moving forward on this business. And it's got to be, and I would say if you're doing it on your own, you just want to have I would literally write down something that just says, okay, I'm happy with this business. Here are the strengths of the business. Here are the weaknesses of the business. I can probably mitigate the weaknesses through these particular strategies. I'm comfortable moving forward with it. Sign off. All right, now I'm ready to I've made that final investment decision, and I'm ready to move to the next stage, which is going to really be getting the lender involved, your attorney involved, insurance brokers, and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of formally declaring that I'm comfortable with moving on to the next stage. Now, the problem's been, I know even working with us sometimes, is all this stuff comes together. I'm talking to you guys about it. We're going through the checklist. We're reviewing the QOE. There's, maybe a couple questions I might have or you might have that we go back to the broker. And then in the meantime, all of a sudden the lender already inserts themselves into the process and starts asking for documents, and we haven't formally declared or made a decision, or we've made a de facto decision by moving along the lender's checklist and starting to gather their information. So I think before you even get to that, again, I think Doug's absolutely correct. There needs to be some sort of a formal acknowledgement that you're comfortable with everything, but you're not going to get to that until you get that QOE back, if you get a QOE done, which I typically will advise it unless you're getting audited financials or you're getting, you've got really high level prepared financials that coincide with the bank, with their tax returns for the most part. Then, maybe you want to get one, maybe you don't, but whatever. As long as you've got that QOE and you've got that post LOI diligence checklist filled out, you're comfortable with it, you formally declare you're ready to move on to the next step. I would not do it until those 2 items are in place, or you're comfortable with the information on both of those pieces of information, and then make that formal decision and then take that next step.
And let me add to that, there's actually a third element that's talked about in our training, and that is a second pass of your IVC, the intrinsic value calculator. Because sometimes the first pass in the early going pre-LOI, you have to make some assumptions on best case knowledge that you've got. You say, well, I heard X, Y, and Z, therefore this ought to be check yes, it's good. And that drives, like we said, ultimately it drives the pluses and minuses on your multiplier effect. So now that you got hard data, either through QOE or your operational due diligence, you can do hard yeses and nos on the check boxes in the IVC. So make a second pass of your IVC and just be sure that the multiple that you pledged in the LOI is still substantiated by the data you got out of the due diligence. Everybody with me on that? And it may, your green light may be a little more amber. It may say, yes, I want to move forward, but whoa up, I got a couple more questions I need to go over with the seller. And those questions may even be a slight renegotiation based on some material value that you see coming out of the due diligence. So it's not necessarily a hard red or hard green light at the FID. It could be a yes, but conclusion you want to make, and that introduces one more box in the flow chart I just showed you of revisiting a few things with the seller. But for your economic benefit, it would be critical to visit those things and have those discussions, not just eat them in the deal. But
that requires that you guys are really comfortable with what you're looking at in terms of both the QOE and the post LOI due diligence checklist. Because if you don't have an understanding of of everything that's in there, you're not going to know to go back to ask those questions. You're not gonna. I mean, you're just not. I mean, you don't want to skim over any of that. And Doug's absolutely right. You should, you obviously take it through your second pass, but then address them directly with the seller or the seller's broker. Preferably at that point, you have a relationship with the seller, so you want to go directly to the seller at that point, because the brokers usually are useless once you've gotten this far down the road.
Well, and this is purely editorial on my part. So, here's my upfront disclaimer. To Rich's point, even if you've got a really great broker that's really supporting the deal, at this juncture, when you need to have a discussion about some potentially material impact on the terms of the deal, I hope you've got a relationship with the seller that you can go direct and work through that. If you're still having to filter that through a broker, even a good broker, that doesn't feel right to me. I not to say it won't work, but I think the best case would be to have built that rapport with that seller prior to needing to have that deeper dive discussion with them about final terms. Really tough to overcome that if you don't yet have a good rapport starting with them. So Rich, you want to talk a little bit about banking package? What I will say quickly is I know the kind of introducing your banker into the deal is kind of a little bit all over the board. We do have a lot of people that want to try to get introduced to the SBA bankers we know early, and that's fine. We support that. And several of the bankers don't mind trying to do some sort of pre-qual, but there's a certain level of detail you need to be able to give them. There's not a lot of value in just meeting a strange banker and saying, hi, I'm Doug. I someday down the road somewhere, I'm going to do a deal, and here's my personal financial statement. Can you qualify me? That may or may not have a whole lot of immediate value to the deal. So, Rich, what's your experience on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just kind of lead in with kind of just a high level of what you can expect to have to do around the banking package. But typically with your banking package, which is why I would tend to want to wait as long as possible, except in the case initially, if you want to, for instance, reach out to your lender, you've got initially 3 years worth of tax returns. You've got the LOI. I probably would send them, if you prepared an IC deck for, the investment committee. They love that deck, by the way, as opposed to reading a CIM where they have to pull out information. But if that's all you have is a CIM, send that over initially. And I'm talking really initially. If you want to get the banker involved early in the process to get kind of a preliminary underwrite on the deal, that's fine. As you get kind of further in and we've pulled the QOE, and we've gone through that process, really kind of what the bank's going to be looking for from a package standpoint to really fully underwrite it. They'll have their bank list. And I think at the workshop, we provided a detailed list that First Internet puts out for them, for what they ask for from that standpoint. But generally, most banks are going to be fairly close. There may be some nuance around kind of some documentation they may want given the level of assets in the business or what have you, or some quirk of the business. But for the most part, be prepared to deliver. Again, if you haven't delivered those tax returns, they're going to underwrite the deal with 3 years of tax returns. So anything that they see in the QOE will be taken not with a grain of salt, but they will consider it, the performance of the business. But by rule, and Doug can kind of tell me if I'm right or wrong on this because he's the former banker, I think under the SBA guidelines, they still have to underwrite based on the tax returns, and they can adjust off those tax returns for various items. So no matter what the seller's telling you about the business, and whatever numbers they're giving you that are non-tax return related, just understand that the lender's going to be focused on those tax returns and the story around the business. So there may be some room for adjustments there. So be prepared to deliver that. Be prepared to also, once you've kind of gone through the QOE and you've done a lot of this post-LOI due diligence, you have to write a business plan. And I always advise AEs, don't spend $5,000 on someone writing your business plan. Just go to liveplan.com, spend $20, and you get it written for you right there. It's pretty easy. Go in there, answer some questions. You have to still know the business a little bit. You can't just depend on the AI to write the entire thing without you not knowing anything about your business, because the business plan won't make sense when it comes out, once the output comes out. So I guess that's kind of an oxymoron or redundant. But go there, get your business plan written. You can even do your forecast through there, although I don't recommend doing the forecast on that. It's a weird look, and it doesn't flow well, and the lender doesn't typically like the forecasts that come out of those business plan programs. But you can easily get that done. You can do it yourself. We have the models in there for you guys to do that yourself. So but whatever, you're gonna have to have the forecast, you're gonna have the business plan, you're gonna have the tax returns. You're going to have to provide information, obviously, your background. They should already have that, but provide our, resume, your history, and what you've done. That lenders are getting increasingly concerned, and this is based on conversations we were having with Alan and Paul from First Internet at the last workshop. Lenders are getting increasingly concerned for people taking over, for individuals taking over businesses that may not be a fit for their background. And when I say a fit for your background, that means you have to have some sort of strength that you can point to, which would allow you to convince the lender that it is a business that you can handle. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that if you're not a plumber, you can't buy a plumbing business or an HVAC business if you haven't been an HVAC technician. But if there's a problem with the business, or there's a way to drive business growth, and you have a background, let's just say sales and marketing, and there's a sales and marketing opportunity for the business, you got to be able to kind of, elucidate that to the lender, let them, pass it off, sell that story to the lender so that they get comfortable with you. So providing your background along with all these other documents is important. They're also going to ask for, a copy of even early in the process, I've heard lenders ask for copies of any lease documents that you have for the building that the business is located in if it's not owned. Because obviously there's a risk there if you take it over and you can't get the lease extended, that there's going to be a problem. I'm not going to get into too many specifics around the banking package as far as like specific documents, but these are some of the major documents that you're going to look at. But so if you're looking at business plan, tax returns, your resume, be able to, a summary of the business, your model, okay? Those are going to be probably the major pieces that you're going to need for your banking package, and those are going to be the major pieces you need for any capital raise you're going to do on the equity side as well. Just so you guys understand that, equity investors going to want to know who you are, what the business is, what's your business plan, how they're going to exit from the business, how you're going to drive business growth, is it realistic or not? They're going to be looking for the same things that a lender is going to look for, plus a couple of extra, plus a couple of extra items. So if you can kind of put those items together for your lender, they should be able to get to kind of start the underwriting process. And again, there'll be specifics that they'll ask for, like, corporate resolutions, organizational documents, tags on, or proof of ownership on, asset items and that sort of thing. But all that is kind of like more confirmatory more than anything.
Yep. Well, for the sake of time, I want to jump to one more area, and then we'll hopefully have a couple minutes for any questions everybody's got. And that is, as we get near closing, one of the things to anticipate, and I would argue even try to include in the language of your purchase agreement, is some notion of how you're going to true up the business right at closing. All of these businesses are sort of living, breathing organisms, and if you want to think of it as one of those long party balloons that they use at the restaurants to twist up and make animals for your kids, there's a little bit of balloon squeezing that goes on all day long, every day in a business. Some income comes in or expenses go out, and that it's a back and forth, and you got a puff up here and a puff up there. And for the sake of closing on the business, there needs to be a little bit of sort of a notion of truing up. Where is the business on the day of closing? Are there some receivables hanging out that haven't been collected yet? Is there work in progress that still needs effort, both personnel and materials? What does that look like? How does that all come together? And some of the most complicated or frustrating closings we might have had is where there just wasn't a lot of good work done on defining how that needs to get counted to do the true up. And it's more of a good faith, well, I'll trust you, and when I take the keys on day one, it'll just be so. Well, not because of anybody acting in bad faith or anything, but sometimes it creates surprises that you as a new owner just don't want to have to deal with. You might have been looking at the numbers, counting on one thing, and when the true up goes another direction, you don't get that thing. It doesn't materialize, and now you've got potentially a cash flow or working capital hole that you've got to overcome. I mean, these misses on the true up have direct impact to the success of your closing. So thinking through, just in your own mind, or you should, by the time you get near closing, and you're working through the purchase agreement, you ought to have an idea what you expect. You've negotiated a price, but that price should come with some expectations of what you're going to get. So the question is, that's really what should drive a true up, to say, well, how am I going to prove that I'm going to get all that stuff when we do? So that's it in some really simple terms. So with that, a couple minutes left. I do want to allow some time for some questions. Anybody have anything or even thoughts they want to share?
Yeah, I'm never short for a perspective. The pause to see if anyone wants to jump in. This is great. It's always helpful, to get the thinking from you two at Acquira. From the post LOI checklist, I do appreciate that. It can be a daunting spreadsheet exercise. I looked at it more as like carving, or carving a piece of clay or working something down to something more meaningful. For me, there were elements that weren't relevant. Not that I was looking for things to take off of it, but there was 196 questions on it. Not every business is going to be, all in for all that. About a quarter didn't make sense for me. My business is all B2B through brokers, so there was no marketing. We're not selling real estate. I don't have warranties in this business, right? There's no patents. So you could responsibly take things off, which made it more digestible. But what I found is that as I kept going through it, day after day, week after week, I got more comfortable and more, frankly, more eloquent on talking about the business, because it forced me to think about it from different vectors, which are not always obvious in this. So it is a thing of value, but it can be a challenge to get your mind around that first. So that was just my experience and my approach.
That's a great call out, Mark. And you're right. That list was compiled looking at all experience we've had or collectively we've had in different elements that have crept in and should be addressed during due diligence. And you're right. Not 100% of that is applicable in every situation. So it's worth a first pass just to kind of look at what you do know about the business and just say, well, I don't need this section, that section, such and such, because that's just not the nature of the business. That's fine. But yeah, thanks for sharing that takeaway on the intrinsic value it had in adding to your shtick for going out there as a buyer. Any other thoughts? Questions?
I would just like to comment on how valuable it is, the possibility to kind of go through the different layers and, deep down using these tools, not only the lease, but the intrinsic value calculator that has been mentioned, going back through these notes and catching up the pieces of wisdom that we have here. And I also, in the two opportunities that I have looked, I also value very much repeated visits with the owners and at the site. I think that I've been surprised on how sometimes people is much more flexible than what some of the processes suggest. So I think the iteration in itself and the repeated use of the toolkit that we're getting is very valuable.
Thanks, Luis. Appreciate you sharing that. Okay, one last time. Anything else from anybody?
Hey, Doc, this is Hector.
Yes, sir.
Is there a methodology, tool, spreadsheet that can be used to clarify, WIP and the status of receivables and payables with the seller, at closing? And the reason I'm asking this is because, you have mentioned this more than once, and it seems it is an issue that can give you some headaches at closing. Is there something more structured just versus just having the conversation and clarification, with the seller?
My quick answer on that, Hector, is that there's a pretty wide variety of how to look at work in progress depending on the business, and it's hard to create a standard template that works well for such a wide range of businesses. The basic challenge is to simply begin with a list of jobs in progress. And by the way, this is more applicable to those who might be construction or project-oriented businesses. It's not really for like a residential electrician or a residential plumber where you're doing homeowner service calls. This is more for bona fide project commitments where there's a start date, there's an end date, there's a scope of work that is contracted. And what you're trying to capture in your WIP schedule is, number one, a list of what those are and what the dollar value associated with each of those projects may be. And then you've got to peel into it and look at what has already been collected on the revenue side, what has already been expensed, and what is left, and what are the terms for what is left. And a common scenario is a contractor gets a small amount as a down payment, maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe 25%, but then they go to work and they have to work quite a while before they're entitled to get the next draw in the next revenue cover for what they're expending. So there's a timing issue there that has to be accounted for. And if you're closing in the middle of that, you've got the notion of the seller paid for time and materials up to a point and doesn't have revenue to offset that, or vice versa. They took the revenue, but only a small portion of the time and materials has been spent, and you as the buyer are going to be paying time and materials to finish that job, but all the revenue went in the seller's bank. So that's what you're trying to do with your WIP schedule, is break that down and spread it around properly so that you can have an agreement that, hey, you know, you add all this up, the pluses and minuses, it looks like the seller needs to owe you X dollars, or, you know, you may be owing them something based on receivables. It just depends how it all works out. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Funny story I'll allude to without a lot of time, but we had a situation almost, I don't know, 9-10 months ago. We were down to the true up of the WIP, and the seller's attorney presented and proposed one of the most comprehensive WIP schedules I've ever seen. And I thought it was amazing. And we said, great, if we can get the seller to fill this out, this is exactly what we need. Well, when the seller submitted it, what threw up huge red flags was there was no rhyme or reason to how they were managing the money on their projects. A $300,000 project was forecast to complete in 90 days, and a $50,000 project was forecast to complete in 6 months. And you're going, what? You know, it just, and there was no rhyme or reason, and that variation and oddity was peppered all through the schedule. It was just junk. It just, none of it made sense. And it was kind of like, well, if you're running this business this way, it's a train wreck. There's no good way to take this over and make it make any sense. So that was a pass, by the way, when it was done. So, well, with that, folks, I know we're about up on the hour. Thank you so much again for all your time to sit in here. I hope this was helpful to you. I know we got a lot of relatively new folks here. I hope this gave you a little insight into the kind of the overarching theme of all of our training. If you are just starting out, we know there's a lot of content in there. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Just take it in bite-sized chunks, and we're here to help you in all of these meetings every week. So see you next time. Take care, everybody.